Good morning, Land Talker TV subscribers. Jim Rothermich here, Iowa Appraisal, doing another Land Talk TV interview. But to start off with, I want to talk about Land Hero. Land Hero is providing this channel, and just to talk about what Land Hero is. Land Hero is a software that is a subscription-based software, and it is a way to access my sale data comps, and it is very high quality sale data comps. And how is Land Hero created? Well, Land Hero is a partnership with me and Stephen Broxius. Stephen Broxius has created this software, and it's very user friendly. I do research of 160 websites every 3 weeks to download auction results and pending sales. And those auctions and pending sales are loaded up into this system. And you can find those sales on a geospatial map and have the sale flyer and everything. So if you spend very much time on an assessor website, this will, shorten that time up. It will provide you high quality data that is arm's length transactions, and it will allow you to analyze a lot of sale data fast. So if you'd like to do a demo, here's a demo, watch demo button you could click, or you can just log on to www.landhero.us. Well, today I'm excited to have somebody here, a very famous Iowan, Dennis Reyman of Stalcup Ag Service. He has graciously accepted my offer to be on Land Talker TV. I got to turn my phone off here. And he is going to be interviewed today, and we're going to talk about last week there was a soil conference, the 98th annual Soil Management and Land Valuation Conference at the Skeeman Building in Ames, Iowa. This is a conference that is put on by Iowa State University, and we're going to talk about that. But first, welcome to Land Talker TV, Dennis.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. I was honored to be your guest.
Well, thank you. And Dennis, to get started, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about where you grew up at and all the way through college to your career and Stalcup Ag, how long you've been there?
Well, yeah, sure. I grew up in western Iowa and in the northeast corner of Woodbury County. The small town of Cushing is my hometown, and that's been about 200 to 250 people. Its entire existence. So
What county
uh,
is that?
that's in the northeast corner of Woodbury County,
Okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
straight east of Sioux City, about 32 miles,
Okay.
right on Highway 20.
Okay.
So, family's been there since 1891. My great grandfather came across from Clinton County at that time and bought some land, and so that's where I grew up. Was on the farm right next to that. So, and now I still live about 4 miles away from there, and so that's I guess that's the extent of my world travels. Well, maybe not, but that's where I've lived my entire life. But anyway, I first attended Iowa Lakes Community College in Emmitsburg, farm management program, which was a 2 year degree, and I actually found it to be a very good program. What attracted me at the time, of course, this was the late 70s, and boy, you wanted to just get into farming as fast as you
Yeah.
could at that time.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to go 4 years to college. I thought 2 years that they said that we use the same textbooks, teach the same courses as you'd learn at Iowa State. We're Iowa State grads. You just don't have to take 2 years of gen eds. And I thought that really fit the bill for me. Well, and it was good. I appreciate what I learned there. Um, as I started farming in '79 and worked into the '80s, and you know how things went at that time, it got pretty tough. And I started working off the farm, and you know the farming was just difficult. And so I started to realize that I was probably going to be this off the farm deal was probably going to be permanent. And so I ended up by the late 80s, I ended up going back to school at Morningside College, now University in Sioux City, got a business and econ degree. And at that time, appraisal licensing was just coming into being. If you remember the savings and loan fiasco that went on and was seemed to be kind of centered in the southwestern United States, Phoenix, Las Vegas was a lot of it, but the appraisers got blamed. It was bad appraisals that caused all these savings and loans to go down the
Yep.
tubes. So to fix that, we have state licensing. And so I always liked working with numbers. And I thought, boy, that would really fit the bill. If I could just get in and be a farmland appraiser, wouldn't that be ideal? And so that's actually what I did. Kind of took the long road about it, taking a few classes here and there as I could fit it in, and then got started here at Stalcup Ag Service in 1993 and have been here ever since. So that's 33 years now. Stalcup Ag Service was founded in 1942, also in kind of as the result of tough times. Buck Stalcup was a Purdue graduate, Indiana native, came to was a VOAG teacher for 10 years. He came out here to Iowa he took a job with Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company, and they owned a package of farms that they had financed and had repossessed or had gotten back, I guess. They defaulted on the loans. And at that time, they could only hold those farms. The insurance companies could only hold them for a period of 2 years. So Buck's job was to come out here and he had well over 100 farms that he had to sell off, and they could finance those. So his job was sort of to work himself out of a job by selling off this big package of farms around not only northwest Iowa, but into Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska. And he chose Storm Lake as a good place to settle down for this. And he did that in 1935. By 1942, he had worked himself out of a job and had established Stalcup Ag Service. And at that time, he not only did a lot of appraisal work was kind of in its formative years because you just wrote things down and thought it was worth this much, and but then they decided through the 1930s maybe they needed to figure out a scientific method of valuing farmland, and Buck was instrumental in that. And he worked through Iowa State University and then through the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, which was founded in 1929. So we're coming up on 100 years with that organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so Buck was an early proponent of education in appraisal and in farm management, and he saw the need for a high level of professionalism. And so he was one of the guys that really undertook a lot of that work and helped build the American Society. He was the executive vice president of the American Society for something like 17 years through I think from the late 40s into the mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually in a way, the national office was here in Storm Lake at that time. And then it moved on. He actually then became national president of the organization in 1965 and the company expanded a little at a time. And now we manage about 110 or so thousand acres across mostly western Iowa and also into southeast South Dakota, a little bit into Minnesota and Nebraska. But have focused our existence, I guess, here in the Storm Lake office. But we did recently add a little bit in southwest Iowa and have a grand opening tomorrow for an office in Avoca.
Oh, cool. Good deal. Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So how many people do you have working for you there, Dennis?
We've got 9 farm managers and appraisers, and then we've got 6 office staff,
Yeah.
so
No.
15 total.
No, good deal. No, good deal. That's interesting how that started. There was a lot of back in the during the Depression, the life insurance companies sure did own a lot of land across the Midwest and maybe United States from all those foreclosures during that time.
It's very interesting if you go back and there was an ag boom, during World War One, 1918, 1919, really from 1914 onward, was very good times for agriculture. And Iowa State's got a very good publication and on one of their websites, and it's a publication called the Palimpsest, which I don't know what that word means, but probably some Latin does. But there's an article written in 1967 by William G. Murray, and he goes back and examines the history of land ownership and development back from the early 1800s. And in that World War One, post World War One time frame, you could apply those boom times to what we saw in the 70s and 80s and what we've seen more recently. That how, boy, you got to buy land. They're not making any more land and it's
Yeah.
never going to go down. And there's a lot of applications from over 100 years ago that have cycled through history.
Right, right. No, that's for sure. That's for sure. Um, you referred to the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, and then we both belong to that organization. We're both accredited rural appraisers with that organization. And can you just speak to that professional organization? And you were president for them not too long ago, maybe
Well, yeah, I was
2022, I
pres
think, maybe.
Yeah, I got to be president about 5 years ago, back when I was incoming president when COVID hit and
Yep,
shut things down, and Paul
yep.
Moore from Kentucky was president ahead of me there. And so the last five months or 7 months of his presidency kind of got shut down as far as any travel or meetings or that type of thing. And then the first I guess it was 7 months of my presidency was also under the COVID shutdown. And some people said, well, gee, that made it easy for you. No, it's just the exact opposite, because the apple cart was totally overturned.
Right.
And we had to figure out new ways of doing things. And I always said, thank God for Zoom, just like we're doing here. We could have face-to-face meetings, we could have face-to-face educational offerings. And I said, think how much better this is than having to sit on the conference call. It was a massive improvement. And I think we were effective. And we were actually kind of held up as a bit of an example of how to do things in that environment. We were proactive, and I'll give it to leadership that preceded me, that they had already started the wheels turning on online educational offerings, and there was a lot of resistance to that, and both from students and from teachers. But it was the thing to do, and of course now it's very prevalent. But we our wheels were in gear that direction, and so when COVID hit, we were able to respond quickly and keep people engaged. Our membership stayed. We held membership. Other organizations really struggled, but we were able to keep people engaged. I engaged with almost every chapter at least once, and some two or three, a lot of them 2 or 3 times. And so that was a unique opportunity. And it's making lemonade out of lemons, I guess. But when you sign up for a job like that, you don't know what's coming down the pike.
Oh, and for sure, I had never thought we was going to have what happened with COVID. I just thought it was just going to be a short-term thing and then be over with. And boy, was I wrong
Yeah,
about that and how much change occurred. Exactly what you're talking about. But everybody else had to change, and I think we were a little bit, kind of hesitant to do all this, Zoom calls and one thing I know is online auctions. People didn't think you could sell farms online, but by God, you had to change or you wasn't going to sell any farms. And so
yeah,
everybody had to make that jump. And then there was some like what you're saying. You guys were kind of ahead of the curve with being doing this online stuff. And so the designations, just to talk about, we're both appraisers. What they do, what they've done for me is it's specialized education in agricultural appraisals. And so they focus in and provide high quality education for agricultural properties. And so that's the benefit I've gotten out of it. They also provide farm management education. Do you want to speak to that too, Dennis? Because you're AFM as well, accredited farm manager as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I do hold both designations, which maybe that means I'm a glutton for punishment. But when I started here at Stalcups, I started as an appraiser, and and that was when state certification just was coming in, as I mentioned before. But I really wasn't satisfied to become state certified and call it good. I wanted to get the best I could get, and that was, in my opinion, was the ARA designation. If you're going to be a farmland or an agricultural property appraiser, you should become an ARA.
Mhm.
And so I was just so pleased with the education I got. And at that time, that was before we had all this internet. We traveled to wherever we had to go to, and we'd sit there for up to a week.
Yeah,
Some of those classes were
yeah,
7 days. So it was a time commitment and it was a financial commitment. But and not only it was not only the education, but it was rubbing shoulders with the professors and the other people in the class. And I remember so many people that I went to class with over the years, and some of them have fallen away out of the business, but some of them have risen and done very well and had exemplary careers. So I knew I was in the right spot. Just right away, I knew I was in the right spot with this. So and the farm management education is the same way. Um, and it's not easy. I mean, you got to have with the
yeah,
ARA, you've got to have 5 years minimum
yeah,
experience, and you've got to have hundreds of hours of education. And it's all tested, and then there's the
yeah,
big demonstration appraisal project,
yeah,
and there's the two final exam is 2 days. I've been told it's comparable to, a master's degree by people who have master's degrees.
yeah,
So I don't know. But yeah, it's very significant. The AFM, they did change the AFM down to 4 years experience, but still, you still have to take a number of classes and do that demonstration report and that final exam. Um, so yeah, I went through that on both sides of the aisle, I guess you could say. And so it's well worth it. People say, I don't have time. Yeah, you do have time. We've all got 168 hours in a week. You got to figure out how you're going to prioritize that. And I, at that time in my life, that was a priority, and I've certainly never regretted a minute of that.
yeah, yeah. No, it's those designations certainly are earned. They're not handed. They don't hand those out to you. You've got
Yeah.
to
The
go through the
benefit I've
rigors.
seen here, Jim, is the referrals that we've gotten. And I've always said that our our investment in education and our investment in our annual dues and whatever else is involved has not cost us anything because we've gotten referrals. If you're a member of the American Society and people know you and you've earned the designations, that really opens some doors, and it's valuable. And likewise, if I have a client or somebody calls that says I've got something in whatever state, I either know somebody or can figure out pretty quickly who I can steer them
Yep,
toward this. I know with full confidence it's going to give them good help.
yep, yep. Sure, sure, sure. During COVID, Dennis, one thing you did some presentations online, and one of them I recall vividly is I live in Des Moines, and I'd always heard of Correctionville up there in northwest Iowa, and I always figured there's a prison up there, but didn't know for sure. I'd kind of been around there, maybe through there appraising farms up there in that country, but after watching your video, I found out there's no prison up there. So can you just speak briefly of how that name of Correctionville, Iowa, come about?
Well, that's right. I mentioned that I grew up near Cushing, and my address is now actually Correctionville, and they're side by side towns, 6 miles apart. And Correctionville, also on US Highway 20, sits on a correction line. So as you look at the map of Iowa, you'll notice that there are several lines of counties as you go across the state where the county line jogs
Yep.
over as it goes north.
Yep.
And those jogs are correction lines. They're survey corrections as you work your way up to the North Pole. Those straight lines actually jog over like that. And one of those jogs is right on the main street of Correctionville in downtown Correctionville. So as you drive down the street, say you turn off Highway 20, head south down Main Street, you're going to come to a little bit of a dead end. You're going to have to take a bit of a right for, I'd say it's 100 feet, and then continue on south. And
Yeah.
that's called the jog.
That's
That's
the correction line.
Yeah, that is a so that point is actually three different townships. The My 4-H club, my grandfather actually founded the 4-H club in town, and that is called Rocky Union 4-H club. It's Rock Township, Kedron Township, and Union Township all come together right at that jog.
Uh, Interesting. Like I said, I always thought it was there has to be a prison there, but never knew for sure. And
Now you know.
now, yeah, and so all of our subscribers know now too. So very interesting stuff. Before we get into the soil and land valuation conference, let's just talk real quick about the planning. How's the planning conditions? I think you guys are done up there in Northwest Iowa. Just speak to that and how good the crops look up there, Dennis.
They look pretty good. Planning took off well, I suppose you could say early April, but really mid-April. And, a lot of corn put in April, beans, you know how that goes anymore, pretty much simultaneously.
Yeah.
My own personal corn was planted April 16th, and the beans were 9 days later on April 25th. And now I've never had this happen before, but my corn got froze.
Okay.
I'm not sure what day, but it was about the 1st of May. And that, boy, it looked pretty tough there for a few days. And if I were a younger guy, I'd have been nervous. But, that's one of the benefits of getting older is you see things and don't get quite so nervous. But it comes back. It looks good. The growing point's below the ground at that point, and it didn't kill it. It's going to be fine. But yeah, overall, corn is up. I'd say 4 inches is an average height, and with very good stands, really nice even stands. And soybeans are, mostly emerged. I've heard of a few fields that are a little bit uneven in emergence due to some crusting or what have you, but it's all coming. And really, at this point, we have no concerns about the planting portion of the season.
None of those soybeans that were up got frosted off.
No, I didn't hear of any that got froze off. A lot of them had not emerged yet at that point when
Okay.
that frost hit. So, and my corn was in a creek valley, so that cold air settled in there.
Selma.
The
Yeah.
higher part of the field, and there was above a terrace line. Anything above that was high enough; it did not freeze.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting how you all got up there, got everything planted down here around Des Moines. I think they're getting finished up. But then as you further south, I own farmland along the Iowa-Missouri border, and they had last week 9 to 11 inches of rain, and so that ground I own hasn't been planted yet. So I'm hoping this week gets they get it planted. So that's how much difference and variability on rainfall. And as I look into extended forecast, it looks like we're going to have, next 2 weeks is going to be pretty dry.
Yeah, as I was in Ames last week, and then I went up to Mason City, Clear Lake area on the way home, and there was a lot of, not seriously ponded, but there were ponds in the fields. certainly seen worse, but we don't have that over here. I was up at Spencer yesterday and there was a little bit of that, but not bad.
Right, 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 right. Well, Dennis, let's talk about the 98th annual Iowa State University Soil Management and Land Valuation Conference. It's put on by Rabil Shendio of Iowa State University Department of Economics. Um, this has been going on for about 100 years, almost 100 years. And how many years have you been to this, Dennis?
Well, I've been there most every year for the last 33. I do know I missed one here or there, but I'd say 30 out of 33. And I
Right.
thought this was a great agenda. I thought that was one of the stronger programs that they've had in a long time.
Sure, sure. Yep, yep. And um, this is a conference really for anybody in that owns real estate or has anything to do with farm real estate. So, it's not just, for people like me and Dennis. It could be for anybody, any landowner, anybody that is associated with land ownership could come to this.
Yeah, there's a lot of lenders that attend this, and I walked in and the first guy I saw was one of my tenants.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So
yeah,
farmers,
he likes
absolutely.
taking in this information too.
Sure, sure. And so typically that's in May. It was a week ago today, Wednesday, May 20th. And so they do a survey. There's the planning committee, some really strong people here, professionals here in Iowa, and um, but they do a survey before the meeting and ask questions. What do you think change in land values is going to be this year, and then looking ahead the next several years. And here's the results. And these are surveys of those land professionals that attended that conference, as well as what expected commodity cash prices are going to be. As you know, I'm sharing my screen, and as you can see, it appears this year in November, everybody's kind of expecting the market be just down just a hair. I would consider that a stable market, a negative 0.15%. And then it goes, the northwest part of Iowa, northeast, southwest, and southeast. So I'm really not too surprised by that, Dennis. But going forward, it seems like there's a lot of optimism as far as land values go. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't real surprised either, and I agree. I would call the November 2026 line there. It's a little bit up, a little bit down, but generally that is a steady market. 1% either way. How do you really say? I mean, that's basically one bid, one or two bids at a public auction, and I think that you have to be not only a good appraiser but a lucky appraiser to get within one or two bids every single time.
Right, right. That's
Uh,
that's hard to
so
measure that minute of a change.
yeah, I mean, I bought land at auctions, and I don't have an exact stopping point when I go into that auction. So, could I bid one or two more times than I planned on? Yeah, I could, and certainly other people do too. Sold a lot of farms where, afterwards you're signing the paperwork and you said, well, how close were you to your limit? Oh, I was already past my limit. So, how do you say within 1%?
Right, right, right. Um, you know, Looking at the land market, well, can you just talk about the land market conditions in your area right now? What is it, and how's the volume of sales, and just kind of talk about what's your thoughts on in your area, and maybe across Iowa or Midwest, whatever you want to comment on, Dennis.
Yeah, well, you do a good job covering the whole state of Iowa with your work, Jim, but we just kind of concentrate on our area up here in the northwestern part of the state, and that's maybe, a third of the state. And we also, pay attention into South Dakota and so forth. But what I see is somewhat light volume, although it's not as light as what some people try to say. It is very light in given areas. I'm sure you do appraisals as well, where it's hard to find, enough comp sales that are,
Absolutely.
yeah, it can be a challenge. I like to find five or six comp sales and then, you throw out the high and the low is how I look at it. And if you got three or four in the middle that's pretty well zeroes in what your value is going to be.
Mhm.
But if you're really struggling to come up with three, we consider three to be, kind of a minimum. Um, getting three or four sales sometimes is pretty hard to do. So you have those areas, but generally speaking, I guess it's been a steady market for a while. We had a step down back, we had that big jump up in what, 21, 22.
Mhm.
And boy, and then I think it was about June of 22 that was kind of the peak. And then it backed down. And then since that, it's been more of a steady market. You can find the sales that are, off that are off, and that's usually a lower quality type of farm. Or some neighborhoods are just not as competitive, and some are super competitive. So you got those factors to consider as well. But if you want to say the market's off and point to one sale that supports your argument, you can do that. But generally, it's a fairly steady market. Um, Looking at these predictions as far as what's coming up, what people think is going to happen in the next few years down the road, I guess a 2 to 4% or a 1 to 4% increase for 27, a year and a half from now. Uh, that's really kind of in line with what historically would happen. It's certainly no big. We've had double-digit jumps a lot of times in the past 25 years. Nobody sees that type of thing coming. And then if you go again into 28, it's kind of a doubling again of, say 2% up to 4% or, somewhere in that ballpark. It's kind of just another step up, which fits with historical trends. And, part of the story is rising yields. We're not excited too much about 200 bushel corn anymore. We think we need to be knocking at 250 or better, 275 on the good ground, maybe 300. So that's a big part of it. People complain about the prices, and of course, I'd like to have a lot better prices too. We all would. But boy, that production is really what keeps driving things.
Yeah, sure. And the information I read now, Dennis, is the seed corn companies predict an average 2 bushels per year if you're planting, new genetics every year. And I think they pretty much change the numbers of those corn numbers every year, pretty much. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, you're not going to get more than 2, maybe 3 years out of if you got one that did really well, you might use it 1 or 2 more years, and then you're going to be on to the next thing. And they'll tell you this is going to be 5 to 10 bushels better than what you're using. And well, if you've used it if you're into the third year, maybe it is going to be 5 to 10 bushels better. Um, so yeah, and I think that 2% or 2 bushel increase, I think that's actually rising faster here lately. So yeah, gosh, with AI and all the things they can do already, plus all the analysis they can do quickly with I just expect that to continue. It'll rise
Yeah.
faster, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. I think if they start, I think, I've looked at some new technology or read about narrower rows, getting those corn, going down to 30 inches to maybe 20 or 15 inches and spreading that corn out. I've heard, that change is coming and, they can up those populations and get those leaves, more access to sunlight, not have them all piled up in one row, so to speak. And corn is a grass. So,
Yeah.
um, so it could do that. So I would expect that technology is going to come to fruition here sometime in the future.
You talk about
And
solar power, man, corn is a solar plant. I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
that thing takes sunlight and converts it into that kernel of corn with all the feed value, all the energy value that's in that. It's it's really powerful, and I think that we need to do a better job of describing to the non-farming public what a great product it is. And my golly, we're using it. People say, why do we grow things that people don't want? What do you mean don't want? We've got record demand, record consumption. And it's a huge benefit.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and we found that out at the conference how much demand there is for corn and beans. And one of the changes here lately, as far as soybeans go, is the planting date. On my farm up there in Palo Alto County, they were planting soybeans up there in mid April.
Yeah.
And being from Missouri, like I am, well, we'd have never thought about planting beans that early, and here I was up here in northern Iowa, and not only were they planting beans, there was a lot of other people planting soybeans. You want to talk about that early planting soybeans, Dennis?
Yeah, and that's been what a thing for the last 5 years for sure, and maybe 10. I don't know if it goes back 10 years. It was probably starting to come in about that time as far as a popular thing to do. But I remember we had an agronomist come in here one time, and his territory was up in uh, east central South Dakota. And he farmed up there too. He was actually northwest of Watertown. So you're getting up there into some latitudes, that are get cold. And he said he'd been planting early, no-till, into standing corn stalks for 8 years, and he said he had never lost a crop or had to replant. And so I thought, well, if it works
Interesting.
that far north, we should be okay here.
Yeah, yeah. And the treatments they put on those seeds, that's probably the game changer, isn't it, Dennis? That's how is allowing this to happen, isn't that right?
Oh, it's a massive help. Yes, we don't plant anything that early that's not treated.
Right, right, right. Yep, yep. So so production's getting better with corn and soybeans, and that's our two crops here in Iowa. Corn is king in Iowa, and so that helps these land values keep either be stable or continue to go up over time. And so, just looking at the next 2 years, I figured the market's going to be stable. If we have any kind of hiccup in growing conditions or with the demand that's needed for corn and soybeans across the globe, if we don't keep that supply there, it's going to shoot those prices up, and we'll start really seeing some aggressive increases in land values if that net farm income goes up.
Yeah,
But
another round of $7 corn would definitely influence the land market higher.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, any comments on the commodity prices? What did you think about that, Dennis? Of
Well,
this
yeah,
year's, I figured that was in line, but
I
going
think
forward,
that's reflective of the strong demand. It's a little down for this fall, which you would anticipate, and then a little higher as you go down the road here a couple of years. But yeah, if the China deal kind of develops as it's supposed to, and we continue on the path with some of these demand sources, yeah, I don't think the average price since we went into this ethanol era, which kind of started in 2007. If you look at the monthly average prices for the state of Iowa that Iowa State posts every month. It's through USDA, but you can find it on the Iowa State website. The average corn price has been 465. So we are predicting basically average corn price. And the bean price is the same way. It's like 1125 is the average bean price over, gosh, how many months is that? That's getting close to 20 years, so it's over 200 months. And so we're predicting average prices here.
right, 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 right. Sure, sure. Um, I've got the agenda up here. Let's talk about economic forces shaping agriculture. Um, this was a presentation done by Steve Elmore of Corteva. And any comments on that presentation that you want to share, Dennis? One thing that we keep talking about is the demand for corn and soybeans, and as you can see on this slide here, here's the production in yellow. I'm looking at the first column on the left, on my left. Um, the columns there are production and the line is consumption, and boy, it's way up there.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, Steve Elmore, I've always said, or I've said for years, is my favorite economist. And he just brings a great presentation every time. And not only on agriculture, but the economy in general and the global economy. And he's been in very high positions where that is his job is to, speak on those things. So anytime we can have Steve on our agenda is a real treat, in my opinion. And yeah, this again, it's that demand issue. It's we just continue to rise, and don't only look at the U.S. Statistics. You got to look at the global statistics as well. And it's we've got a great demand story, and it could get better.
Absolutely. And so that's what I'm saying. If any hiccups in production, lowering that supply, it's really going to make those prices, jump. Those corn and soybean prices jump.
And
And
Steve, as Steve mentioned, he's a native of South Central Nebraska, and his family still farms out there. That's another great thing about Steve. He's a farm kid.
Mhm.
He's our age, but he's a grew up on a farm. But
Uh-huh.
he and he talked about how dry it is out there, and Kent Smith here in our office is from that same area out there, South Central Nebraska, and he said he was at a funeral. The cemetery was the grass was totally brown. He said the only green grass in the cemetery was where it dripped off the edge of the little shed, and that strip of grass was green, but everything else was totally brown, and that was just a couple weeks ago. So they're running their irrigators to get enough moisture in the ground to plant into. That's not a good way to start. So if Nebraska continues to be that dry and if they just come in with say they're low, if they meet their low of the last 10 years yield wise, that's going to be significant.
Sure, sure. I think about those sand hills out there and how much grasslands out there. What's that going to do to cattle prices that are
Well, I tell you
already
what it's done is
astronomical?
it's hit the hay prices. Rock Valley, Iowa is
Uh-huh.
up in the northwest corner of Iowa, and they've got a very significant hay auction, have for years. And the hay prices up there have increased pretty significantly. Looking at it, it was 150 to 190 for premium hay. They haven't seen prices anywhere near that for, till just now. It was, last summer, my gosh, hay was, you could hardly give it away. So I think it's that demand out of Nebraska that's pulling that in.
Right, right, right. Well, I watched Ag Day, and I think it was yesterday they were interviewing a farmer out there in the sand hills in Nebraska, and he had a huge grass fire, like many of those people out there did, and I mean there was nothing left. I don't know what his cows are going to do. He has to
Yeah.
buy hay. There's no question about it, or move those cows to where there is some grass.
Well, I'd love to see CRP get released for, grazing or baling. If we could bale it, truck it out there so they can feed it on site. Uh, that's to me, that's what CRP ought to be available for is an emergency situation like that you can draw upon that resource for feed.
Right, right. Well, they are in an emergency situation for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And that farmer was talking, or rancher, he's talking about it's so dry out there. They haven't had any spring rains and it just sound terrible.
Well, and
So
when they do get rain on those sand hills, it's going to be a bad erosion issue too.
I'm sure, I'm sure, I'm sure. Looking at this slide here, as you can see, soybeans, huge demand and for that, and it's really went up over the past several years. But one thing that's probably hurting the most is cotton and wheat. And those aren't crops here in Iowa, but do you know what the deal is with those cotton producers? Because they sure are making a lot of noise down south. Can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
boy, when the southern guys make noise, that it gets a lot of attention in DC.
For sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
I don't know a lot about cotton. It's an expensive crop to grow, and it takes specialized equipment. Those cotton pickers or cotton strippers.
Uh-huh.
Parts of the country use cotton pickers and parts use cotton strippers. I've learned that. So, but those are as expensive as a combine.
Yeah.
So it's not a cheap crop to just jump in and out of. And cotton gins, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here. I don't know much about this stuff, but I think that the ginning industry is in some trouble too. So if you lose those acres, I think that's a crop where if you lose those acres significantly, it might be hard to bring them back.
Hmm.
Wheat, my gosh, they've, talking about being dry in Nebraska and Kansas is the same way. But I hear these guys on the radio that have been out on the wheat tour, and that crop is really in tough shape out in the wheat belt.
Yep. Yep. I seen some growers out in Texas showing their wheat crop. It wasn't worth running the combine through.
Yeah.
So anyway, um, one thing we did had a presentation on AI in agriculture. And this presentation was provided by James Coltis. Um, AI is something we're going to have to be dealing with here, Dennis. You want to make any comments on that?
Well, yeah, and we need to deal with it now. We need to have our toes in the water. I don't know what we're dipping into here. It's kind of a really big issue or a really big topic to wrap your head around. But I have experimented with various AI products, and I try to listen to people who are a lot smarter than me on these things. But I kind of use it as a super Google type of thing.
Uh-huh.
I have
Yep.
used it to, and it does a great job as far as it can really cut your time off some research.
Hmm.
Um, and I have not used it to design things or to analyze. I have not entered anything in there that would be proprietary data. I know people put in numbers or Excel spreadsheets and have it analyze. I don't know. I don't want to put my data out to the world.
Hmm.
That's my impression. I know you can get your own subscription to AI, but I don't understand all that yet. So I'm a little cautious as far as what I do, but absolutely, we've got to move forward into that world.
Yep.
Do I,
Yep.
do I, am I really excited about it? I don't know if it's right or wrong, but this is where we're going.
Absolutely. That's my thoughts too. It's the future. It's the way we're going. Um, as far as real estate using artificial intelligence and real estate, I think right now it's limited because of the information so fragmented out there. And why do I say that? Because say like for me to do Land Hero, I have to go through all these websites, and there's some really good websites and there's some really bad websites. And I know how to navigate those bad websites to get the information I need. Um, until we get some of that fragmentation out of that, it's going to be of limited use in the real estate industry. But I think eventually we will work through that. But I think this is coming, no doubt about it.
Yeah, my fear is over reliance on it too quickly. Using it as a shortcut and just being satisfied with AI as as the answer, and that's going to cause some problems, but that's to be expected.
Right. Well, he talked about the presenter. He talked about crap in is equal to crap out. So,
Yeah.
so that's
If
what you
if
got to
you
be
grew up on a
careful with.
farm, you understand that picture.
So, then we had some presentations by Farm Credit Services, Pete Burmeister and Jeff Burgess of Medopolis Savings Bank. Listening to those guys, Dennis, what I picked up from them, um, there's some financial stress out here, no doubt about it. But it's not everybody. It's
Yeah.
it's it's a few, and I've heard more about us being in the 1980s farm crisis. Well, here's the slide that talks about that. Um, that's not the case, Dennis. You want to speak
No.
to that?
Yeah, I mentioned that I started farming there in the late 70s, and so the 1980s I enjoyed the full brunt of that. Uh, but one of the great opportunities I really consider myself fortunate because there were guys that were pretty knowledgeable who passed along things to me that I have never will never forget and have tried to pass some of those observations along. But one of the great opportunities I had, back in those days, every town had a local co-op elevator, or maybe a couple of towns were together, and our elections were coming up for the co-op board of directors, and at that time, you always had two people on the ballot for a position, and they called me, and I was just a young guy. They said, "Would you allow us to put your name on the ballot?" And I was against an incumbent. And I said, "Sure." I knew that the incumbent would win. I was just happy I got any votes at all. But few pity votes, I guess. But anyway, the guy died then, had a heart attack, passed away. And so they called me and said, "Your name was on the ballot. Would you fill out his term?" And it was almost the full 3 years. So I got to sit in on every, monthly board meeting, and our co-op was in sound financial shape. But boy, we had a list of accounts receivable that we'd go through that every month, and you'd look at the aging, and you'd see those guys they'd be getting out there to 180 days past due and things like that. And some of them were very well established farmers. And we had a very astute general manager and a good board of directors. And I mean, I was just along for the ride, but boy, my ears were open. And that I really learned a lot. And it was the financial stress at that time was so widespread. And not only that, the banks were going down. There's a list on the Iowa banking website of all the bank closures. And boy, it just got to be in about 82 to 86. It was like a bing, bing, bing type of thing. And I don't know, there were six or eight banks around this general area that, went by the wayside. And, when a bank fails, man, oh man, there's reverberations. I mean, even if it's not your bank, but it's even, three, four towns away, it's
Hmm.
those shock waves are felt. And the psychology is a thing that you can't get across. It was such a desperate psychology. And, there was a banker that got shot and killed. We don't see, we're nowhere near that today, we hope. Um, but it just isn't the same. It was a very rapid run up in the last half of the 70s. Well, from 74 to 80 was a very rapid run up and very inflationary, followed by a very harsh hit with interest rates. I've told this story a number of times, and I'll repeat it here. I was in my early 20s, and I was in the bank office, my loan officer's office there, and he said, prime rate. We always talked about prime rate back in those days. He said, prime rate just went over 20%, but we're stopping at 19 and a half. And I'm like, well, thank God for that. Here I am in my early 20s trying to figure that situation out. And boy, I remember when interest got back down to 14%. And I was like, gosh, now I can finally make some headway on this stuff. And but
What
boy,
year
it
was
was
that?
tough.
About what year was that?
Well, that was in the early 80s. I suppose that might have been 83. Those high interest rates went on for several years. 1980 to 1983, maybe, we had super high interest rates. And they fluctuated a lot. They sometimes changed that prime rate several times in 1 week at that time. I've got a record of all that stuff, and it's pretty interesting to look at. But then we got back down to where we were in the low double digits, and it's like, oh man, we can finally. But I'll tell you one more story, and this is a good one too, quickly. Uh, Friend of mine who is, my parents' age, he said one day, he said, there's land auction over next town over. He said, let's go over and watch how that goes. So I got in the pickup with him. We drove over and it was good land. Today it would be more than $20,000 an acre.
Hmm.
But we stood there and it was an 80 and could hardly get a bid. Finally got it sold for about 1,100 bucks an acre. And he came over, the auctioneer came over to us and he said, he said, I had four guys standing here with money in the bank to pay for this. And he knew that because he was on the bank board of directors. He said, I had four guys who could pay for this, but they're getting 15, 16% on their CDs. They're not going to buy land. And
Yeah, right.
so
Right.
that's when that was basically the bottom of the market right there.
Yeah.
You could buy a farm and pay for it with no money down. You can make the payments with no money down. So at that point, why would the market go lower? But today we're so far from anything like that that you couldn't even think about it.
Right. Right. So what's the difference between now and back then, Dennis?
I've heard, I think the big difference right now is that we understand that young farmers are a precious commodity. And we don't want to lose young farmers. I think society understands that, or rural society. I think back then, I was part of the baby boom generation. I was born in 1958. So, we were pretty numerous and we were expendable. And so if a young guy like me was going to go down the tubes, well, so be it. That's just the tough breaks. And so I think today there's a lot more focus on keeping the next generation um, moving forward, or at least keeping them stable until times do improve, and they will. It's always cyclical, and that's the thing. When it is good, don't spend all your money.
Right. Right.
Prepare for the downtimes because they'll
Right.
come.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Well, a lot of people ask me, will we ever see a 1980s farm crisis? I don't know if we will, Dennis. I'll let you comment on it, but here's my thoughts. With crop insurance that we have, it's kind of putting a floor on that. And farmers aren't as levered as they were back then. Iowa State puts out information, 84% of the land is paid for in Iowa. That's going to create a floor there too. I don't know how much was levered back then in those 1980s times, but I've heard it was heavily leveraged.
It
And
was,
and
yeah. Go ahead,
and
Jim.
then you hit it with those upper teens, low 20 interest rates, and man, that was just a disaster. No matter how good you was. So I'll let you comment on that,
Well,
Dennis.
yeah, the Iowa State, every 5 years, Iowa State does this land ownership and tenure survey, which is actually mandated by the state government. And it's the last one that they did was 2022, released in 23. And they did a look back to the 1980s. And back then, there was a lot more contract sales, a lot more shoestring, I'd call them shoestring deals, where there was virtually no money down. And of course, a lot of those went back to the sellers. The $3,000 an acre at that time, your gross income was maybe 300 on a good corn crop. So to pay 3,000 and then pay those kind of interest rates, you couldn't gross enough to pay the interest.
Right.
So yeah, I don't see it was such a perfect storm of bad events coming together that we had such a massive corn carryover. Our interest rates were high. That made the value of the dollar high. That made our exports expensive. And so we had close to a year's supply, almost, like an 80% carryover supply, stocks to use. Uh, now if we're, 20% carryover is terrible. 15% is, somewhere in that range. But, to think about having that kind of carryover, and that's where the PIC program came about in 83. We had, 50% set asides, even a 0.92 where you planted 0% of your corn base. It was all base, all base acres back then.
Yep.
And,
I remember.
yeah, yeah.
I
And
remember.
uh, so, those types of things, that's why this demand deal is so huge. And we've just got to really work hard to maintain and build that.
Right. Right. Create new markets all the time. I remember Dad getting a PIC certificate, and we'd go to the L. One time we rode together, and he went to the elevator and he sold it. I really don't understand what it was all about. I know it had to do with that PIC program, but he was
Yeah.
happy. He was happy about it.
Well, and that was a way that, and I really didn't deal with the PIC certificates either. I guess I was kind of, just more on the sideline and raising some livestock when that PIC program was coming through. But uh, that there were guys that would kind of arbitrage those PIC certificates, and they'd buy them and sell them, and try to make some money that way. And I guess just like anything else, you can arbitrage it if you understand it.
Sure, sure. Going through the rest of that meeting, there was something I thought was interesting. Carolyn King of Continuum Mag, she did a presentation and she talked about the Haney soil test. Had you ever, I'd heard about it, but don't know a lot about it. Do you know much about that, Dennis? That
Yeah,
Haney
I've
soil
heard
test?
about it too, and I have not used the Haney test, but I know like if you listen to the Hefty Boys on TV or RFD TV or radio, they're big proponents of the Haney test. You can get a lot more information out of it, and it's a different method. It's as I understand it, it's a wet method, and as opposed to a dry method, which is the standard method where they basically bake the soil before they test it. So take all the moisture out of it. So that's a completely different approach. And with the soil health issue and
Yep.
the 45Z regulations, which may be paying you based on soil health factors, things like the Haney test, maybe a really valuable part of that. Probably will be. So we need to be aware of it and increase our knowledge.
Absolutely. So I thought that was a really good presentation. I learned about that. And just thought that is probably going to be coming in the future. It probably be common, going into the
Yeah.
future. So that's, great stuff there. Um, well, as far as Christine Tidgren, she did a legal update. She's with the Center of Agricultural Law and Taxation, Iowa State. Um, what did you pick up anything out of there, Dennis, that you want to speak to or not?
Well, Christine is such a great speaker and so knowledgeable and can just roll with so much
Yeah.
output
Yeah.
and without
Yeah.
stuttering. There's no ums and ahs in her
Yeah.
presentation. And so she's a real gem. I always said we can't replace Neil Harrell. He's one of a kind, but Christine she's her own version of Neil Harrell. And so yeah, anytime, and of course we hear her several times a year, usually. So, but yeah, great updates on the ongoing implementation of the one big beautiful bill and
Yep.
and
Yep.
potential farm bill. We're trying to get a farm bill through yet. and also the tax issues of some of these write-offs that are people are trying to do as far as on-farm research and there's the fertility deduction and things like that. So really, if you're considering those types of things, somebody like Christine is invaluable as a resource. And she's not so big on some of these things that are being put out there. So great resource to make yourself
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah. She really explains one thing that, talking about the carbon pipeline and eminent domain use, and she really does a good job explaining all that and where we're at with that in the legislature and um she's talking about South Dakota pretty much shut that pipeline down, so now they're going to have to go another direction. And I thought that all that was very interesting that she provided information for.
Yeah, they'll have to take it down through Nebraska and go out into Wyoming to get it buried. And yeah, they're not going through South Dakota. I kind of wondered why they didn't try to go up through Minnesota. They had a trunk line going up into western Minnesota, most of the way up to where the North Dakota border is. But I don't think North Dakota's as on board as, maybe they want them to be either. So
Yeah, I guess I'm surprised by South Dakota. I thought they was wanting that kind of stuff. Same way with North Dakota, that that governor is now our energy secretary. I thought they would be pro that, but that adds demand to corn. As we spoke to, we've got to keep increasing that consumption of corn. We cannot ever stay stagnant with consumption. We've always got to keep growing that.
yeah, and people have to keep in mind that it's not the same exact issue between the pipeline and eminent domain. The pipeline is, I view it as a positive if we could ever get that
Yep,
going because it adds value to the ethanol and to the raises the carbon score.
yep,
And that is, Nebraska's they've got that advantage in their ethanol plants. We do not at this time. But so how do you get there? Do you use eminent domain to get there? And that's the emotional issue. Um, and I could argue both sides, I guess, of that. If you're the last guy between connecting that pipeline, or if you're the last guy before it connects into the plant, should you be able to, basically go highway robbery on the thing to allow them to come through? I don't know. I don't know. It you know, probably at some point there's a place for it. But it's a really touchy issue, and
yep.
it's that's why we have judges.
Right, right. No. And so the last presentation of the day was by Chad Hart, Iowa State professor of crop marketing specialist, give the ag market outlook. Comments on that presentation, Dennis?
Chad, Chad has always gone by the term of Dr. Doom because
Yeah, that's
he could
right.
always see the market going down. But Chad, Chad's a great presenter, and he's been, I think, with Iowa State for 18 years, and he's going to retire.
Yep,
So might
yep.
be the last time we get to see him do a presentation with his Iowa State shirt on. But I think Chad will be around. It's not the last we'll see of him, I'm sure. But yeah, his presentation, you look out there at, trying to look a little bit into the future. That you look at that 440 season average price on 2026 corn,
I love it. I love
that
it.
isn't so bad.
I love it.
That, considering the amount of corn we're growing, boy, we could easily be in the 3.5 range if we didn't have this good demand.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
we've got a good story. And Chad is not so much Dr. Doom anymore. He's on board with this too.
I didn't take it as Doctor Doom with
No, I
that. When I
didn't
seen
either.
that, when I seen that, I was like,
Yeah.
so I thought I think our listeners need to know there's opportunity out here. As you look at this chart here, you look at total use, 2025 over 16 million. And then next year's over 16 million. You know, Chad pointed out that that is high, the over 16 million.
It
So,
sure is.
and he was using, you know, as far as corn production goes, you know, it's got that up there, you know, 98.8 million acres planted, 95.3 in 2026. And those yields he was using, that those are high. So if we have any hiccup in that, those yields, I mean,
Well,
it
like I
it
say, if Nebraska falls back due to drought, that 183 is going to be hard to hit.
absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, with soybeans, you want to speak to that at all, Dennis?
Well, again, strong, our production has been great, but strong demand there too. And, this thing with China, trade war with China over the past time period, whatever, has allowed us to, work hard at, developing new export markets. And, so look at that export number. It's dropped off a little bit, but it hasn't fallen off the table. And it's actually stronger this year for 26 than it was in 25. So, um, I don't take that as anything to feel bad about. And, they're projecting $1 higher per
That's
bushel
right.
on price. So,
That's right.
um, maybe we're through the bottom and trending back up. I would like to think so.
Well, let's hope China buys some beans. And
Yep.
boy, if that happens, we're going to be in a really good spot. So, anything else? We're kind of running out of time, but anything else that you know, remember from that presentation, Dennis, that you wanted to speak to?
I just thought that the discussion on the 1980s was really valuable, especially for the younger folks that they don't have that reference point like we do. And, it's probably the hardest times they've seen, or at least, it's one of the harder times they've seen. So it all depends on your reference point. But, if somebody said this was comparable to 1980, maybe I'd agree with that. But is it comparable to the mid 80s? No, nowhere close. So I guess that's kind of my takeaway from that. Always great to see everybody down there. It's you don't have a chance to talk to everybody you'd like to, but just once again, great. You learn a lot outside in the hallway talking to folks too. Just talking to guys like you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's, you know, I talked to a lot of realtors around there, and I was surprised, like I said, on those surveys, how positive the land values were going forward. Because some of those realtors I was talking to weren't so positive. So, but that as you group people together, you know, overall it's positive. So going forward with land values, so that made me feel good. And you know, one thing as you know, I watch all the auctions in Iowa. And really, we haven't had any issues with no sales for several months now. And so whenever I start seeing a lot of no sales, just, you know, every couple of days or, you know, getting over five in a month, I start getting worried, okay, this market's starting to adjust, but it just hasn't been an issue lately.
That's good to hear. Yeah, that's one item that when you're talking to potential sellers, you it's your due diligence to make them aware of that potential that if it doesn't get to your reserve price or if it doesn't get close to it, they always have the opportunity to say, okay, this is all we're going to get, we'll sell it. But they could call it a no sale. And a lot of times those no sales, you're able to get those sold
Right,
pretty quickly
right.
thereafter, but not always. But it's a gauge of the market. It's a valuable gauge of the market. And so if the expectations were priced correctly and you still ended up with a no sale, well, that's a pretty significant marker.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes I call up those auctioneers and ask, you know, tell me about that auction. And they might say, I couldn't get anybody to bid.
Yeah. because they're
And
all getting
so
15% on their CDs, right, Jim?
yeah, yeah. And so when you hear, that might be one, you don't think about it, but when you talk to several of them and those guys haven't talked to each other and you're hearing that across the state, then I would be starting to talk about it in my newsletters and the market's starting to adjust, but it
Yeah.
just hasn't. I haven't seen that yet. So, well, let's just wrap up, Dennis. We talked about the 98th annual Soil Management and Land Valuation Conference. Those slides that I was showing, um, if you put in your search bar, if you want to see them, put in your search bar 98th Annual Soil Management and Land Valuation Conference. You can pull those slides up. There's a ton of good information there that you can look at. Dennis, we need to be wrapping this up. Um, what did you do for Memorial Day?
Oh, I, mowed the lawn and I did some work on the farm and things like that. But we always take time to go to the local parade, which is, it's down to pretty small numbers these days, but still it's important to, support the local legion that does the
Absolutely.
parade, the local fire department, and go to the cemetery and take those moments to pay respects to those people. And my dad was in the Korean War. I grew up with the knowledge that of how important those things are, and he never made a big deal of it, but you knew it was important.
Yeah, yep, yep. I went to Camp Dodge here in Des Moines. They had a Memorial Day celebration there, and the Gold Star Museum was open, and they had, um, uniforms from the beginning of Iowa State, from the Civil War all the way up to the wars of recent. And very interesting history there, and how people fought for our freedoms, and that's very very appreciative of those families that did that for us, for
Oh,
sure.
the sacrifice was amazing.
Right, right, right. Well, Dennis, thank you for being on Land Talker TV. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Well, my office line is 712-213-4860. My email would be drayman, and that's Dreyman at stalcupag.com. That's STALCUPAG.com.
All
That'd be
right.
the easiest.
Very good. Well, if you want to sell a farm or have a farm appraised or farm management, call Dennis is your guy.
You bet.
So, all right. Well, thank you for being on today, Dennis.
Thank you, Jim.